Welcome to this C1 Youth Culture screencast looking at globalisation. And this is the second of two screencasts looking at recent research on youth culture. So in recent years there's been a growing interest in globalisation and the apparently transnational space that youth culture now occupies. So let's begin with the definition of this concept of globalisation. So globalisation is a concept used to describe the way in which different parts of the world have become increasingly interconnected. And globalisation is associated with greater global economic integration, for example, the growth in international trade, which we can see on this particular graph. And what this means is that almost no human today lives with stuff that's only been manufactured in their home country. And globalisation is also associated with improvements in communication, such as the World Wide Web, and also improvements in transportation. Now, for some sociologists, the emergence of global brands, such as Nike, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, etc., represents the commodification and subsequent homogenization of youth culture. And Ritzer has used the term McDonaldization to describe this process. In other words, this term McDonaldization is used to describe the tendency of globalization to create standardization and to create cultural forms that are often based on American values. However, for other sociologists, globalization has led to more choice, more diversity, and the construction of new forms of hybrid or fusion youth cultures. So let's now look at how globalization has played a significant role in the social construction of youth culture. And we're going to do that by looking at the influence of cultural imports, cultural exports, and also the influence of cultural hybrids. So ever since the 1950s, the import of American cultural styles and products, and music in particular, has had a big influence on the development of British youth styles and subcultures. And more recently, various global products from t-shirts to Levi jeans have become incorporated into British youth cultural styles. So increasingly, global businesses have created products that have been incorporated into various youth cultures. So as we've noted in previous screencasts, consumerism is therefore central to modern youth culture. As Besley notes, now more than ever, kids find their identities and values in the marketplace rather than in traditional sources such as the family, church and school. And youth in this respect has now become big business, a social space where multinational companies not only compete to sell things to kids, but do so on a global scale. And in addition to importing culture from other countries, the UK has been very successful in exporting its own culture to other countries. So in relation to youth culture, Britain has been particularly successful in exporting its music to other countries, with the Beatles perhaps being the best example of this. And the globalisation of youth culture has also created cultural hybrids. And cultural hybrids are a fusion between elements of different cultural traditions in order to produce something which is new and culturally distinct. And many contemporary youth cultures have these hybrid elements. So in relation to globalisation, Malone talks about the emergence of glocal youth cultures. So glocal involves global styles and identities which are filtered through local subcultural groups. So that's where this particular term comes from. It's a blend of global culture with local elements. In other words, styles which exist on a global scale are given a unique local interpretation and twist through their incorporation by different cultural groups. For example, hip-hop exists as a global youth culture based around a particular style and identity, but the meaning of this style is interpreted differently by youth in different countries, depending on their own local cultural background and traditions. So it's a good example of this kind of global youth culture that Malone highlights. And perhaps an example in a UK context would be the grime scene, which is hip-hop, but hip-hop with a distinctly Cockney accent. Another example could be the way in which British Asians have developed new musical styles, such as Bhangra, which is a crossover between traditional Asian music and Western pop music. Now, at the beginning of this video, I linked globalization to improvements in communication, things like the World Wide Web. And sociologists have started to debate the impact of these new media on the activities, social relationships and values of young people. And various labels have been invented to describe this new generation of young people who've grown up during the expansion of the internet and from early childhood have been immersed in a media-rich environment. So terms such as the net generation, the millennium generation, digital natives, and also this term, screenagers, have been used to describe this sort of generation of young people who've grown up in a digital environment. And over time, more and more media tools, such as computers, have moved from the public spaces of the household to private places. In other words, from the living room to the bedroom. And youth are sometimes described now as having created a bedroom culture that facilitates their media consumption without parental supervision or limitation. So these new technologies are having an impact on youth culture. As Andy Bennett has argued, we can no longer take it for granted that membership of a youth culture involves issues of stylistic unity, collective knowledge of a particular club scene, or even face-to-face interaction. On the contrary, youth cultures may increasingly be seen as cultures of shared ideas whose interactions take place not in the physical spaces such as the street or the club or the festival field, but in the virtual spaces facilitated by the internet. So this is a kind of new research area for sociologists interested in contemporary youth culture. And digital spaces such as social networking sites have become an important part of contemporary youth culture. And they're often used, I think, by commercial companies to target youth and to try to shape their consumption patterns. But at the same time, when young people are using these spaces, it can empower young people in various social ways. So they're able to overcome the limitations of geography by reaching out to other young people who share their own specific interests. And also, this new media gives young people more opportunities to become active participants in the creation of media content. So the advent of Web 2.0 increases the ability of young people not only to be passive consumers of information and content online, but also to become active creators and contributors. And one creative way in which some young people are using these new technologies is in terms of politics. So some of these new technologies are being used as political tools of resistance. And this was an issue highlighted by the sociologist Manuel Castells in his recent book, Networks of Outrage and Hope. So in this book, Manuel Castells argues that Web 2.0 and wireless communications allow individuals to create autonomous networks of protest which are unmediated by the government or the corporate media. And due to their confidence with these new technologies, it's been young people who've been at the forefront of some of these new political movements that have emerged in recent years. And examples would include obviously the Arab Spring, the Occupy movement, the Indignados movement in Spain.